1996, the year that birthed the survival horror juggernaut that is Resident Evil. The original version of Resident Evil 1 launched on the PlayStation 1 on March 22nd in the year 1996, and from here the series would garner a massive fan following and a vast amount of media in the form of games, comics and movies. Today, however, we're going to be looking 30 years into the future from that initial release, that being the year 2026. We are currently sat here in 2024, 2 years away from 2026, which will mark the 30th anniversary for the franchise, which is a monumental feat to reach. This surely is something that Capcom will want to capitalize on and celebrate, and I was thinking, what better way could there be to celebrate than going back to the title that started it all. Resident Evil 1's original release was phenomenal for its time, and even today still has a bit of a following where people prefer this over even the remake, which is pretty crazy to think of, but it was quite a special game and many still hold it very close to their hearts. And even though it did expose us to voice and dialogue like this.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
What is it? What is this?
What is it?
Blood. Hope this is not Chris's blood. What is it?
It was still an absolute masterclass of its genre and would run with the torch for the survival horror gaming industry. The developers were absolutely fantastic with the way they made use of the PlayStation 1's capabilities, and while they were held back by system limitations, which I will go on to discuss shortly, they made a very good use of what they were working with, managing to throw a lot of story and plot into a multitude of areas while not being too limited by what they had to work with. One of my favourite parts of RE1's development was the use of pre-rendered backgrounds, which helped create that 3D environment feel with the system limitations of the PS1 without actually having to use 3D environments, which I absolutely loved. And I know I did mention a bit about system limitations, but fortunately for Resident Evil 1 fans, Capcom did end up remaking the original game, but this time on the GameCube, which allowed them to improve the game on all fronts. This was pretty much the original game with nothing taken out, except it had a lot added in. And they did a very good job with fleshing out the original's concept. I'm sure there are probably people out there that prefer the original, but I think for the most part, the general consensus of the community is that the remake is an absolutely phenomenal version of Resident Evil 1, and even in gaming as a whole is a very good example of what a remake should be. It didn't take anything out of the original, it only added onto it, and the same could be said for the story development in the remake as well, where they were able to take the original foundation and then add on top of it without taking much away from the original, if anything at all. And of course, with a remake, you can expect some excellent upgrades to the textures, which was the case. The art style was phenomenal. I really loved how they managed to capture the mansion in this very dark and gritty atmosphere. Of course, if you play it now, having played it a lot of times, it's not as scary, but I think for that first playthrough when you come through the mansion, I think they did a fantastic job with nailing the art style and the overall atmosphere, and then in general just capturing that survival horror gameplay. I think I will stop myself there to try my best to not go off on a tangent just talking about how good the Resident Evil 1 remake is, but what I did want to discuss is how one of the main gameplay aspects that sets this apart from the rest of the remakes is the perspective. Resident Evil 2's remake, 3's remake, and the recent 4 remake were all remade in third person, the most notable ones being 2 and 3, which were also fixed camera angles in their original. And that got me thinking, what if Capcom does have a remake of Resident Evil 1 on the way? But of course this time in third person, improved visuals with of course the power of the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, I was going to say S, the Series X, I'm sure they can do a lot with the RE engine in making the mansion look absolutely stunning. And I think the different perspective, that being of course third person, would go a long way with freshening up the title. And I think we got a little taste of this as well in Resident Evil 5's DLC Lost in Nightmares, where they did recreate a lot of the areas in the mansion, but you were playing with over the shoulder, where Chris and Jill go to track down Wesker. And in general, I think this would be a very good way to celebrate the 30th anniversary. Of course, they could use this as a time as well where they can update the character lore to better fill the gaps between this story and the future RE games, maybe add a few little extra links here and there that tie into the future. For example, in Resident Evil 8, where you get the callbacks to the T-Virus and Spencer going to visit the village to get his ideas and then coming back to the US and so forth. I think it could be a really good chance for them to flesh out the original entry. But of course, we do have the other option of where they could potentially just port the remake over to next gen, maybe with a few graphical upgrades, maybe even over the shoulder, but for the most part keep the same assets. That is one possibility. I'm not sure if they would go with that route. And then of course, you could argue as well that Code Veronica and RE5 are supposed to be remade, so RE1's remake might just be left in the dust, given how solid of a remake it already is, and what it already has to work with. It could simply be the case that we won't get a Resident Evil 1 remake, or even a port. But for the sake of this video, I did want to lean more towards the idea of what if we did get a remake, and how could Capcom execute on this. Of course, I did mention all these stuff before about the improved visuals, better story ties, and the other idea that I had in my head as well was them potentially doing a 1 and 0 remake together, but creating a collection out of it where they could call it something like Resident Evil Origins opposed to 0 remake, 1 remake. Instead have one collective story, as they are very, very closely linked storylines. And I would not be surprised if they were to pull this off, especially for the 30th anniversary of the franchise. And I think this would be a good way for them to bring those old games to the forefront and just tie up their storylines and make sure they're modernized so that it fits in with this new timeline of the remakes. Of course, this is all just my thoughts in my head, just free firing. Let me know down below what you guys think of this concept, guys. And just overall, if we were to get Resident Evil 1 remade, would that be something you would be a fan of? Would you even buy it? Or maybe would you even just go back to the original game or the remake that we already have and just play those? As to be fair, we do have the Resident Evil 1 remake on most platforms at this point. So I wouldn't be too surprised if people weren't for this game being remade once again. Like I said, we do have Code Veronica on the way, most likely, and Resident Evil 5. And it is pretty interesting that both the Resident Evil 1 and Code Veronica fan remakes were shut down by Capcom. I feel like if Capcom weren't working on something like that themselves, or considered to do so, there was no reason for them to shut that down, other than giving that generic response of we don't want them using our assets. But let me know your thoughts down below, guys. Of course, I would be all for a Code Veronica or Resident Evil 5 remake, but if we did get a Resident Evil 1 remake, I definitely would be queuing up to get my hands on that title. And with that said, guys, that does bring us to the end of this video. Be sure to drop a comment down below as to what your thoughts are on a potential Resident Evil 1 remake, and even how you think Capcom will celebrate the 30th anniversary. I look forward to seeing how the discussion continues down below. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it. It's extremely appreciated. It does help out the channel a ton. And subscribe for a lot more Resident Evil content. Don't forget to join our Discord, link is at the top of the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.